Hello and welcome. I'm Vivek, product manager here at Apptentive today. I'm super excited to be joined by our four amazing product experts who will introduce themselves in just a moment. Our product experts here, please go ahead and turn on your cameras now so you can see all your wonderful faces. So we're going to be doing a conversational panel today where I'll ask them some fun and important questions regarding product management. Typically, this would happen over a cup of coffee in real life, but we're taking it remote to Zoom this time. Before we start, a couple of general housekeeping notes. If you have anything to ask us about the topics covered today or about customer feedback or communication tips in general, please submit your questions in the open-ended Q&A field in Zoom. You can see the Q&A button in the center at the bottom of your screen. And if we run out of time to answer your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you. So please add your name when you're logged into Zoom because we can see that in chat history later on and get back to you. So we encourage people to ask questions or discuss in the chat here. And be sure to select your message to go to attendees and panelists, not just panelists. And finally, we'll be sharing this link, this recording out later this week via email. So with that, let's get started. So first thing, I would love for everyone on our panel today just to introduce yourselves. So would love to know your name, your title, where are you working now, and what's the favorite part of your job?
I'm happy to start. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Chan Lee. I started my career in strategy and consulting and at Microsoft. And since then, I've led product teams at StubHub and Care.com. Currently, I work with companies as a consultant and an advisor. And what I love most about my job is that I get to work with a lot of different problem spaces, and a lot of different companies and people, and it's really, really fun to have that variety. I do think, Vivek, there should be one more question in our intro, since this is a coffee with PMs, that we should talk about our favorite coffee too. So I will just add that in there, that my favorite is Phil's Coffee. It's in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm located, and my favorite blend is Filtered Soul. I'll pass it on. Maybe Ian can go next.
Sure. My name's Ian Hassard. I'm a senior manager of product management at Auth0. I've been doing this for 15 years, and the favorite part of my job is to, mainly that it's never over. It's perpetual problem solving, which I love. Which involves, KYC, know your customer, getting to understand their workflows, and then getting to work with a bunch of talented people and actually building solutions for those problems. And since we're up in the ante here with some coffee selection, my favorite is Smile Tiger Coffee in the Kitchener-Waterloo area in Ontario. And I'm going to pass this off to Jessie.
Well, very sophisticated coffee drinkers here. So hi, my name is Jessie Alva. I'm a director, technical product manager at SAP Concur. I currently work on the Concur mobile app on the platform side. My favorite part of being a PM is for the last 3 years, I've been doing more API platform core services type of work, and my main customers are developers. But I also interact with customers and consumer support. And so I have a very wide range of customers, which is quite interesting because balancing how to make everybody happy, it's quite a challenge. So it's never a dull moment in the life of, in a day-to-day life of my work. Regarding coffee, I will disappoint everybody. I'm not that fancy. I just have an espresso virtual machine, and I do the Intenso brew, and that's what I drink every day. Kendrick?
Oh, hi, everyone. I'm Kendrick. I'm a product manager at Mailchimp. I guess favorite part of my job is really enabling team members, right? Like, these are the people that actually do the work. I'm just here to, help point them in the right direction. In terms of coffee, I'm by no means a coffee snob, but my friends are, so they tell me what to buy. Right now I'm drinking Red Rooster coffee. I believe it's called Funky Chicken, and it seems good, but I don't have a sophisticated palate here, so I'm just like, yeah, that sounds nice.
Love it. Thank you, Kendrick. I'm more like you too. I'm more actually of a tea person myself, I'll admit, but I do love this show, Twin Peaks, and actually it's shot in North Bend, Washington, and there's like the actual diner that they have in the show. I actually drove up just recently and got some coffee from that place because it's super famous in the show. So Would definitely recommend it to anyone that's looking to make a trip out for a good cup of coffee. Tweeds Cafe is what it's called. Yeah, so thank you for doing your introductions. And it looks like we have a lot of diversity in our backgrounds on what we do. So we'd love to know, how did you get to where you are today? What did your path to product management look like?
I could start with that. So I started my career as a long time ago as a quality assurance engineer. That's what I did in a startup. I got curious after being on the end of the spectrum of the product lifecycle as to what happens before it gets to quality assurance. And so I started getting curious about that, got into a certificate for project management because I figured that could be a stepping stone into product management. And then I got a junior role, a product manager at T-Mobile, and the rest is history. It is at T-Mobile, really, it's what I learned all about product management. So it was very important to be in an organization that really valued that. And that's how I ended up being a product manager.
Love it. Lauren, do you want to share next on your side?
Yeah, as I alluded to, I started off in strategy, and I was in strategy at StubHub when I had the opportunity to work on our international expansion. We were only in the US at that time, and I did kind of that typical strategy project where you look at all the different markets and prioritize them based on opportunity. And after I recommended the UK as our first international market, it was greenlit and there was no team that was in place to actually execute that. So I got to kind of step out of that strategy role and really play the role of operating and helping to launch this along with our CEO and all of our functional heads. So that kind of gave me my first taste of what it was like to not just make a recommendation, but then to actually see it all the way through to launch. And that gave me a tremendous sense of pride and ownership. And that's kind of what led my decision to move over to the product side.
Very cool. Love hearing that story. Kendrick, would you want to share from your side, your journey?
Sure, yeah. So I studied computer science and business in college, so I definitely had a leg up, but I actually went into marketing first because I did really well in those classes for not trying too hard. So I'm like, okay, yeah, this is a natural career progression. Anyway, so I started working at an A/B testing company like a couple of years out of college, and I did marketing for them. So I wrote a lot of blog posts catered to product managers. And basically, like, I started looking like really deep into analytics, how to like build roadmaps and like how to do growth and stuff like that. And I started writing enough blog posts. I got like recognized by a lot of people, and they were like, hey, like this is actually really good content, or at least they told me that to my face. But you know, one of the things was I wanted to transition from like kind of consulting at like a B2B company to actually doing the stuff. So one day, like a Dropbox like job posting popped up and I just applied for it. And what actually made the difference was a lot of the blog posts that I'd written. So like the hiring manager had read that, and I found out later on that, like, you know, even though they're taking a chance on me because I never did product management before, those blog posts were actually taken to like the director of growth at that time, like, hey, like this is actual proof that this person knows what they're talking about and we know exactly how they're going to do it. So I think that was what led me to be able to make the jump, and for somebody to take a chance on me to like move into the product management space.
Wow, I love that. Thank you, Kendrick, for sharing that. Ian, do you want to go on your side?
Yeah, it feels like forever ago that I wasn't a product manager. So let's see if I can recount my history. So I actually started in more of a technical support capacity, and that was actually my first job. And one of the things that I kind of recognized and liked about, you know, interacting with customers and understanding the problems and the feedback they were providing, you know, was constantly interacting with the product team at the company I was at. It was a small networking and security startup. And one of our product managers left, and I got kind of brought into the fold and kind of into the product management arena there. And I was there for 6 years, and then kind of wanted to go to the next level and, you know, what's beyond consumer networking, like let's move to telecommunications. So I worked for a company called Sandvine, which was doing, you know, the completely other end of the spectrum, you know, proper PDLC, proper process, got to learn a lot more on how to scale the process and how to work with all these different international buyers and users. And so I did that for 5 years, and then I decided to go it alone and started my own company where we're doing network security. But this is, those other jobs were physical equipment. So this was kind of like, I want to learn how to do SaaS, and I want to, do kind of a SaaS product approach. And we started a network security company, and a year and a half later, we got acquired by Arctic Wolf. So I worked with a services company. So if you're familiar in the product space, the very big differences between services companies and product focused companies. So that was an education in itself. And then after 2 years, I joined Auth0 to kind of run their security products, and it's been a wild ride.
Thank you, Ian. We're actually a customer of yours as well. So love that. And thank you for sharing your backgrounds. I mean, this is part of what I love about the role. Like I feel like everyone has such a diverse way to get into product and grow in product as well, which is really exciting because, I mean, there's like a lot of hustle involved and the right time, the right opportunity. And, so it's really great to hear your stories. So since you've all been in the role for some time, I'm sure you all have various backgrounds and learnings from it. So I'd love to dive into that. So what do you think are some of the most common challenges faced in product management today?
Oh, I can kick this one off. I'd say there's many, but I'm going to try to shortlist my 3, and I'm sure everyone else is different. I think the number one is the role is so nebulous at times, especially at points of scaling, especially hypergrowth is a term that's used a lot. Where product management often will assume a lot of responsibilities that you normally wouldn't kind of put on the product management. Like if you were in a 100,000 person company or 10,000 person company, you wouldn't assign those roles to that. But I think it's understanding that and creating those lines of separation, and maybe taking on the responsibility, but not taking accountability for it. And then I'd also say virtual leadership, cross-functional teams, especially in the pandemic. I think we've learned all to be remote workers, and even more so. But like the point is more, you don't necessarily have direct reports, and you need to influence, and you need to be able to convince, and you need to get trust of your teams, regardless of what those teams are. And then I guess the last one I kind of listed in my short list was managing up with data. You're always going to have an executive with an opinion. And a strong opinion at that, probably the person who started the company. They might come in and sit on your desk or send you a Zoom or a Slack message and say, I want to go this direction. And the only way you can combat that is having your research lines, lined up, and being able to combat that with real world data to support or disprove that.
Yeah, that was a great summary of like the challenges. I mean, I could totally relate to all of those. Thank you for sharing that. And Jessie, I see you unmuted, so I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, yes. Ian mentioned some of them, so I'll just continue elaborating on that. I think the first thing I would say is understand the role of product management within an organization that you're either working or want to work. It's really important because product manager can mean many things depending on the industry, the size of the company, the product you're in, or you're going to manage, or you're managing. So having a very, being self-aware of that, it's very important because that will tell you exactly whether that's a role you want to be or not. And so that, I think it's the first thing, is to understand what product management means in the organization or industry you're going. I think my 3 challenges are, one, it's partnership with your development team or your development leader. I always remind this to our product managers that we cannot be successful without somebody coding or building a product, right? That's flat out. You could have beautiful roadmap decks and beautiful PowerPoints and POCs, but if you don't have a strong partnership with your development team, you're not going to pretty much be successful. So having that relationship and kind of making sure that it's a team, it's really important. The other one is, I think Ian alluded to this, is leading without power. And so I think of a product manager as an influencer, if you will, for the young folks that are in, I'm sure you're familiar with what an influencer is, because you really have to rally people behind you without having any power, right? These people don't report to you, their bonus it's not bind to you or to your success. And so really being out there and being able to influence is key. The third one is prioritization. I think we forget sometimes to see the big picture and step a little bit out of that day to day and had to prioritize, right? I think that sometimes we tend to bring a lot of randomization with the development teams, and that really kills the morale and kind of the speed of the dev. So really being conscious as to how you prioritize your roadmap and what's the value and the ROI that you're planning to bring, I think it's key. And I think that's also a challenge because it doesn't come easy thing to do. That's it.
100%. Thank you, Jesse, for sharing that. I mean, a lot of times product managers have to like morph into the organization they've joined and like
Yes.
build trust and influence that way too. And really what you mentioned, like if you can't partner with your development team and build trust again and influence, it's going to be hard for you to like, you know, show that vision where we're going to. So I love that. Yeah, Lauren or Kendrick, do you have any thoughts you want to share from your side?
I actually agree with everything that Ian and Jesse said. And I would even just summarize it as one thing, which is the challenge is working through people. That whether it is, you know, motivating your development team or getting your stakeholders to buy into your prioritization, it all boils down to, can you work through people? Because as Jesse pointed out, as product managers, sometimes I joke that like we produce nothing except that, you know, we help all the pieces fit together and to run smoothly.
Totally.
Cool. I'll definitely like second like everything is said here. There are challenges that we run into on a daily basis. I think I have two very specific things, and then one of them requires kind of a story if we have enough time. But I'll just, you know, feel free to cut me off anytime. I'd say one is like data fluency. So for me, like numbers are a huge thing. And like the way I prove anything we're going to build, it has to be built on data and like very clearly called out assumptions and modeling so that we know like what exactly we need to double check ourselves on. And I guess like even these days, it never ceases to surprise me how many people are not really data fluent. And it's an issue because you always measure yourself on your own ruler type. And if I'm measuring on like a specific outcome, let's say like ARR or user growth, or it could be anything, right? And an executive is measuring on a different ruler saying like, oh, if I launch this, or if I hit like, you know, my specific, you know, KPI to get my bonus, it's really hard to reconcile those things because you're measuring things differently. It's very unlikely that you're going to agree on what you should do as a result of that. So a lot of times, like, it comes down to like, how do I manage the expectations of somebody who's measuring something completely differently from me, and reconcile that with my own KPIs. So that is like, you know, definitely a big headache in general. I'd say the other thing is like, it's also part of managing up, but it's not being afraid to speak out. This is something I learned like early on when I started product management, and hopefully the story doesn't drag on too long. But essentially, when I was at Dropbox, I inherited a project which had been talked about for years. We already actually committed the outcomes to the board, and basically it was a very bare bones like, okay, this is the plan, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then somebody was like, all right, we'll put it on a shelf and we'll revisit it in 2 years. So I inherited this. It was like, it turned out to be a very big project. But basically like me being like new to the product management space, I was like, oh, there's this like senior product principal, staff level PM that came up with this plan. I should follow it and then deliver that to the board to say, here's, you know, what we previously committed. I think this is the best idea. So we did a bunch of like data validation stuff early on. So for instance, I used a sales team to get like kind of proxy data, actually calling like hundreds of customers to see like what their behavior would be like, because it's kind of hard to, well, let's just say I needed data at the time. And all the data that I'd come up with actually supported a different plan. But because I was presenting to the COO and CTO at the time, I was like, I'm just going to go with what like this previous person that's been at Dropbox for years has like already told them. And actually ended up getting chewed out. Basically, they're like, all your data suggests that we shouldn't do this plan this way. And so I need you to go back and redo this to like what you actually think. And for me, that was like a really big growing experience because one, I'd never been yelled at by anyone that senior before. So I was always scary. But then the other part of it is like just trusting the data points that you have and like not trying to fit in the data that you have into an existing like hypothesis, but really looking at it and be like, hey, what's happening here? Is this actually the right decision? And not being afraid to like stand up for that. I think that's something I see a lot of like product managers struggle with, is just like being able to like stand up to people that get paid way more than you and have like a lot of control and authority. Yeah, that's something I would recommend for everyone.
I love it. Thank you, Kendrick, for sharing that story. I mean, I think we've all been there at some point where you've had to like say no or had a hard time saying no. And, I think a lot of what you said really helped me, like reminded me of like being outcome driven, not output driven, like going towards a KPI, a metric, a goal that you're aligning towards, not just like, we're going to output this roadmap of things, right? And like, like that being really something, like the outcome being something you're driven towards. And I think Lauren, you summarized it really well. Like all of this involves working with people, right? Like understanding how you communicate with every single person you're dealing with. And when things go bad, being that calm presence that people can look towards to you. Like you don't own or deliver anything, but you're also that calm person that's like coordinating and pushing things along. So it's really important. So thank you all for sharing your stories there. And I love that all you come from different industries and backgrounds. So I would love to ask you all, like, what are some trends you anticipate happening in the next 3 to 5 years for your particular industry? And I know, Lauren, this is kind of interesting for you because you're in consulting and you're actually like working with probably different industries. So I'd love to maybe hear a different twist on it, like what kind of things you're seeing maybe across multiple industries. So yeah, please go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So as you know, I spent a number of years at StubHub. So ticketing is still a space that I follow quite closely. And, it's been very interesting over the last year and a half, 2 years with the pandemic, because it basically killed the live events market for a time period. And now things are starting to resume, but I think that it's going to look really different in the next 3 to 5 years. As our panel is a case in point right here that like we're doing it virtually, right? It's not happening in person. And I think that even with some of the biggest stars out there, they're really rethinking that strategy of, is it live events? Is it virtual? How do I have a whole mix of ways that I can connect with fans? I think there's a lot of choices out there. During the pandemic, I really got a lot of enjoyment out of watching, Jason Derulo dance on TikTok. Like he's very talented in doing these little dances. Or, Kylie Jenner would do her live stream and talk about her makeup, and fans would have the opportunity for them to like have her answer their questions, right? So I think that the event landscape, I think there always will be that hunger to be part of the crowd and to be part of that experience, but there will be a lot more of like hybrid ways to connect with an audience. So that's one that I think will be really interesting in the next 3 to 5 years. And I'm happy to see if the other panelists have other ideas before I keep blabbing on.
I could go next. I think that couple of things I see in product management, I think I see, and it's a trend that's been going, it's you really need to be technical. So there is not just product management, it's you need to understand technology. And that is a trend that I've seen in a lot of companies. You need to understand that, how your backend works, how your APIs work. I'm not saying you need to code, but it's really important from a product perspective that you understand technology. So that's one trend I've seen. The other is machine learning. So we use it already even in our app. I see that coming up in every product that you're going to start building. So really getting knowledge of what machine learning means, what artificial intelligence means, how can I use it to my product, how can I leverage that? It's really important. So as product managers, we really need to be looking ahead as to how we could leverage that technology to make our products better, to eliminate some of the person interactions and kind of be more self-service, if you will, right? I think the other part is on the go. right? I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, is you really depend on your device for everything. I run and I take calls on my device, so I expect my Zooms to work seamlessly. I expect my Slack to work seamlessly. I expect my email to work seamlessly in my device. And I think that, especially for the mobile space, right, it's going to become a trend that it's just going to become the norm, right? You take your laptop or your phone and you work wherever you are. And so I think that's definitely a trend that I don't see going away. And so when you're building products, you always have to think, what is a mobile experience going to be? And I know sometimes that tends to be an afterthought, but now that is really front and center. So those are the three things that I see, not new trends, but they're just going to keep growing even more.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with those. I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Jesse, just to dive deeper, like as you said, technical and machine learning. Do you see the product manager role getting more technical over time too?
I do. So I say this because I have this thing where every year I reassess whether I want to stay in a current role or not. I've been doing this for years, so it has nothing to do with the fact that I don't like my employer, by the way. I just think that it's important for you as a career to figure out what's out there and whether what you're doing is really good. And so I go into interviews and I look at jobs on a constant basis just to see what's out there. And everybody expects a product manager to really understand technology. And that I don't see that going away, right? Whether your title is technical product manager or program manager or product manager, you really need to understand how your product interacts with the technology. And that means just being able to draw even boxes, right? My client talks to an API on the back end, a little square, and this talks to like a proxy, and this talks to firewall. You don't have to be like, again, an architect or a developer, but you really need to understand that. So I think that being mindful of that, it's really important. And what I do, by the way, because I like to change industries and product, this is my third job at Concur, by the way, within the org, because I always like to learn. What I do, it's really, I just ask, the first thing I ask when I start a new role is to the devs. I said, can you whiteboard the architecture of this product? Can you give me the specs? Can you, or I even pretend to be the customer and I go through our training material to our customer customer facing documentation that we might have to understand how our product works. And also what I do is I try to either register for our product or kind of walk through so I could have an idea, not only from the front end, but also from the back end as to how it works. Did that answer your question?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I've totally seen that evolution happen as well. And Ian, would love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I know you specifically work on a very technical product in nature by itself, Auth0, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to dovetail a little bit off of that before I go into kind of where I think we'll be in 5 years. But I do the exact same thing. Like I sit in the hot seat. My first question is, can you draw a block diagram, or is there one that I can go and look at? And I don't go for like the signaling diagrams for like how things are interacting right away. It's like, what do these pieces do? Why are they important? What is their purpose? And then it's funny how far you can take that. You draw a box and you put 5 boxes inside that box, and one of those boxes has 3 boxes in it. And you go, okay, what do those do? And then eventually you start talking about where they connect and what they do. And then you start revealing tech debt. Product management's kryptonite. But the reality is, I think that's really important. And what's interesting on our side is the kind of the Auth0 thought process and philosophy is every company is a tech company or is fast becoming a tech company. Whether you're, again, it's funny because you didn't think about it being 100% true. And then I had a renovation done, and then the contractor had a portal for me to log into to see a Gantt chart, to see how things, and to pay my bills and all these sorts of things. And so even like every industry is starting to adopt technology in interesting ways. And the customer identity and access management space where Auth0 plays is interesting because, almost everyone has a login or some way that they log in, and they don't think about how that impacts their end user and their end user experience. And so, we went from, last couple of years where our buyers were the R&D engineering or the IT org. So those are kind of 2 different orgs, to marketing and customer success having almost an even seat at the table. And we're seeing that evolution happen now, which means we need to target a completely different set of users, because people are now starting to, instead of it being, oh, login and security, I want to make sure that they've got MFA, it's now, show me the conversion funnel, show me how these metrics translate into revenue, into our business. Hey, we lost, we had too much friction in our login flow or our sign up flow, so we lost N number of dollars. And we're already meeting some companies now that already have this highly instrumented, but have no way of doing it on the login and sign up. And, I know you probably don't think too much about your login and your sign up experience when you log into products like, Uber or, GoPuff or whatever services you're using, but you certainly remember the bad ones. And you probably you vote with your wallet and say, I'm not going to use that service because it was too hard, or you gave up and abandoned something, or you didn't go back after you completed your first transaction. And those are the challenges for identity in the next 3 to 5 years. Is it's becoming more of a marketing problem than a security problem. And so you're seeing this block that's in, like, everyone's probably seen that cybersecurity, a billion vendors, diagram, and identity is kind of moving out of that. It's kind of an Venn diagram now of both the security, but also kind of the marketing and conversion and sales process, because capitalism is the most sincere form of democracy. People vote with their wallet. So you have to have, and we're running into this point where a lot of services are becoming commoditized and differentiated only by the experiences that they provide. So that's where I think our challenges are.
Thank you for sharing that. And now that I think about it, even as a customer of Auth0, I totally understand that. Like, that's the next natural question, like, how are people converting? So thank you for sharing that, like, where you think you're going next. And even mentioning diagramming, I'm sure in this last year with remote, we've all gotten really creative in how we diagram and share ideas with internal teams, technical architecture. I'm sure we'll have our own tools. So that's become an important factor, even on a technical end, even from a design sharing perspective. So, and yeah, Kendrick, do you want to share anything from your side?
Yeah, certainly. I was actually thinking about Ian's comment of, like, having contractors show Gantt charts and stuff. And sometimes I wonder if that's actually a good thing. I remember one example where my dad was getting quotes from contractors to fix, like, I think it was like a dryer or something. And the guy whipped out his iPad and my dad was like, uh-oh, this is going to cost an arm and a leg. And lo and behold, it did. So especially with, like, SaaS, it's interesting, like, how, like, those costs have to be passed somehow usually. But anyway, a whole other topic. In terms of, like, industry, I'd say there's, like, within the industry, there's a lot of stuff that I'd second, like machine learning. And I would say, like, data fluency, again, is really big. If you want to learn about machine learning, learning about A/B testing and SQL is a great way to intro into that, because it teaches you the fundamentals of what machine learning is built on. And I think, like, that's really a necessity. It's just people understanding the numbers as we're moving more towards, like, outcome-driven teams versus, like, just shipping stuff. I think there's going to be a pretty clear separation of, my friend likes to call it, like, growth product managers versus just normal product management, because growth is focused on KPI. It's not just to boost user numbers. It's actually, we're here because we're indexing on what's going to move the metrics that are important to companies. Yeah, and I'd say, like, industry-wide, I think it's interesting because there seems to be, like, cycles between hardware, new hardware being available, and then software, like, catching up and being able to do things. So, like, a good example is, like, like the, I guess, Uber era, where suddenly, like, everyone's doing on-demand things. That suddenly creates a huge rush of people, like, trying out to see what they can do there. And I've talked with a lot of VCs about this. Like, right now, it seems like there's almost a lull in that there's not as exciting of companies, or at least among my peers, there's not as exciting companies to be like, oh yeah, I really want to go, like, work on that. One of the things that I've been talking about people with is, like, drones. And I'm not by no means like, oh my God, drones are so cool, but there's a lot of opportunity available with, like, the introduction of drones. And as much as I hate seeing, like, drones fly around, I think it probably might be the future, and seeing, like, what that will enable us to do.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm really excited to see the future of drones too. I haven't played around with them myself, but curious to see where they go. And thank you for sharing that. I definitely feel like that too. Like, I feel like 5-10 years ago, like in college, all we could talk about was just like, oh, what's the new hot tech? What's the new startup? Like, where's the next place to go? And definitely feels like there's more of a lull, but curious as to why that is. Thank you for sharing that, Kendra. So gonna switch into something more on a tactical level, like would love to know, we all have our different ways of working. Would love to know what strategies do you use to prioritize your product roadmap? What tools or methodologies are you using for that?
I'll go first because I am not so hung up on the tools, and I know that some product managers are. It's just a personal choice. I am more about what's my audience gonna read. What are, because you could have PowerPoints, there's like tons of software out there, but if your audience, your stakeholders don't read it, then it's useless. And so find out really what works, right? So I've used Jira epics for my other dev stakeholders. I'm like, fine, you don't want to look at a PowerPoint, go to a dashboard in Jira, right? For my VP and above, fine, you don't want to go to Jira, I'll create a wiki for you, right? And that's how we prioritize. For my designers, fine, you don't want any of that, I'll use whatever software you're using. So I think it's really about finding out what works for the audience you need buy-in to, right? So I review my roadmap monthly with all my stakeholders. And I maintain all this plethora of different ways, and I link and from one place to the other. And you might be thinking this lady's crazy. This seems like a mess. But at the end of the day, I need my stakeholders to review, provide input, and be aware of what's going on. And if that takes me maintaining the same roadmap in different places, that's my job. Because I think from a product management, roadmap and prioritizations are key, right? And so that's what I do. So I am not in the tool space. I'm more on the what works for your team and for your audience, really, for the stakeholders that have to buy in and had to be aware.
I really love that you really see all your stakeholders as your customers and that you're just ready to meet them wherever they want to be at. So I 100% agree with that. I think to go along with your point, I think it's so important to spend the time upfront to really define what your prioritization framework is and get buy-in with your stakeholders on the criteria that you're using to prioritize. And in all of, the companies that I've worked with, it's always, some form of ROI, but what those KPIs are will, differ depending on the company and what's important to them. But you need to make sure that everyone is bought into that framework that you're using before you go off and, execute it, because otherwise they're not going to, go along with the results of the prioritization.
That brings me, sorry, I just wanted to add more. You're totally right. And the part that I omitted, it's the format. You're right. You also had to, some people like the ROI, other audience like the customer value, others like what is the technical, what's in for me. So also knowing what ROI to show to what stakeholder, it's also important.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because everyone's saying stuff that's completely aligned with my thinking as well. I've always made jokes about Jira, and I have a love-hate relationship with Jira, but it's I always call it the tool that defined a process, because everyone says, oh, we use Jira because that's the kind of roadmap org we are. I'm like, that's not a roadmap or a type of org, but it's a philosophy for sure. It's really interesting because I've gone through the whole process of bringing in different tools, because every leader that I've ever had has said, well, let's bring in Roadmonk, let's bring in AHA, let's bring in ProdPad, let's just do everything in Excel, let's just do everything in Sheets. And I've been through everything and it never worked. And it was interesting because I was exposed to this concept of Metcalfe's law, which is this value you get out of a community is the square of the number of participants or members of that community. And it's totally true that you just need to make sure that all your stakeholders are as close to what you're generating as possible, so that you can get the value of that large group reviewing and participating with the content generation, creation, and moderation. And I always say that one of the best skills of a product manager is storytelling. And I think that being able to appease all your different stakeholders and customers. And I love the fact that I also love the fact that you call them customers, is just being able to get everyone on board with the story. Like just having gone through this part of our product delivery lifecycle process where we built up a whole story deck and almost like a storyboard on kind of what we're trying to do, why we think it matters. It's, multi-year effort, but this is what we need to do and why, and making sure that everyone has access to it and not having this elitist view on kind of your roadmap and the tools that the product management team gets access to versus the rest of the organization, because ultimately you want everyone from product marketing to sales to anyone to be able to chime in and comment. So I just wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I would just, plus like 100 to like everything that's already been said. Like, I love the way you think about it, Jesse. I think the only thing I would add is whatever your process is, it's not good enough and you should do retros, right? Because you need regular feedback on what's working and what doesn't. Like, for me, we started out with a very simple process that was absolutely awful, but it was just me and a designer and a couple engineers. And then as our team got built up, it's just like, okay, what meetings do we need? When do we need to do grooming? When do we need to do spec discussions and stuff like that? You just like have to constantly iterate and get feedback so that you can improve your processes. Because yeah, you're never going to find the perfect fit. There is no tool out there that solves all your needs. And then you have to know when to like cut off things you love too, because I absolutely love Dropbox paper and I hate Google Docs. But there are issues with that. And like, I got enough feedback from my team that was like, please stop using paper. I'm like, okay, I guess so. Even though I probably work at like 5 times the speed in paper than I do with Docs. I'm just like, all right, fine, I'll move. But then I moved to Confluence instead, so.
I love it. I love hearing all your answers and like you all got consensus on that, because and Kendrick, I think you summarized it better than I could myself. It's not really about specifically the process or the tool you're using, like you're saying, Jesse and Lauren and Ian. It's like more getting alignment with your team, and just goes back to the people-centric nature of product, like making sure everyone's on the same page and you're, showing them, you're telling the story, right? As you said, Ian, like where we're headed, right? And that's really important, and making sure you're telling it in a way they understand and they're energized. So I love that. So would love to ask one more question. So, being close to the customer is a key part of being a product manager. So I would love to know, what have been your favorite ways to connect and get feedback from your customers?
So, go. Do you
No, go ahead.
Sure. So there's 2 that really like stand out for me. So one is we have a tool which is basically a way for us to like reach out to certain customers and actually get feedback from them, like using a code base like pop-up. So one of the things is that that's a huge plethora of data that generally people just kind of read and like, okay, that's cool. So what I did, at Mailchimp, we're really lucky. We have support insights analysts that are specifically the connection point between us and support, and they help us like aggregate things. So one thing that we did together was we actually went through all the feedback for like a specific flow and we quantified the data. So let's say we had like 1,000 tickets, right? We can say, oh, like 30% of these tickets, unfortunately, are related to a single bug. And then we know to prioritize that. But then we also see things such as like UX UI issues, like wayfinding, navigation, some things, directions are unclear. We're able to like take something that's typically just like, oh, okay, like this is one customer comment in this place, and turn it into like, okay, how does this scale according to like a larger population so that we can roughly get a sizing for it. I think that's something that like lots of teams can really easily implement. And I've been trying to like push at Mailchimp as well. Sorry, cat's doing weird cat things. I think the other that I really enjoyed, like from a personal perspective, was just we sat down with a user researcher and a designer, and we actually did rapid prototyping in front of a live customer. This is obviously pre-pandemic, but we were trying to redesign a specific flow, and we actually just like showed different prototypes and designed them as the customer was giving feedback. Obviously, it's not like a scaled way to collect a ton of feedback, but since we're essentially starting from scratch, it was a great way for us to like really quickly like figure out what's a better version of this flow.
Cool. I'll go next. Now I'm curious what Kendra's cats are doing. I only have a dog. I don't have cats. So I think it depends on what the stage of your product. So if you are building products that are, let's say if you want to know the status of your product, what I have learned is, and I do this religiously in every new job I start, it's you partner with your support people, and you either listen into the calls, look at the backlog of tickets, like look what customers are saying, existing customers are saying about your product. And I could guarantee you, if you do that for one day, you would have a slew of like a roadmap forever just to fix that. So that I have seen that it's really efficient because you really get the customer telling you what's not working, right? Because customers never contact support to tell us how great our product is. That's just never the case. So that's one. If you are creating a new product, I think that I'm in the enterprise space. So in my case, what I really like is beta testing. And what that means is I select a slew of customers, right? Like different sizes and whatnot. And I just do beta and I'm like, hey, I want you to test my app. Can we do this? And just getting their perspectives on how they see your product or the new feature that you're building based on their, how they use the product, the industry they're in, the size of the company. It's really relevant to get that feedback from actual customers that might need to, might be early adopters. So those are the two, I think, like high level things that I would recommend based on where your product is, in addition to what Kendrick said.
Yeah, I would agree with Jesse on that completely. I think that I'm going to say I'm old fashioned because I like to get in front of the customers as often as possible, because I've read through win-loss reports. I think partnering with support is a great source of inspiration and where you can get a lot of good, useful data. I find there's a good correlation between loss data from your win-loss reports and complaints coming in through support, because often you also have to look at prospects that aren't buying your product. And I think that often relates to the reasons why people are having problems with your product or didn't want to buy it, or sometimes the users aren't the people that made the buying decision as well. So there's a couple different things there, but I can't underscore enough the importance of getting out of your comfort zone, out of your office, putting yourself in the chair next to your customer, which has been difficult the last year and a half, maybe with a mask on, sitting and observing your customer and seeing how they work with it. And I think that it's also becoming really important to look at how different people interact with different applications that don't translate into text. We've seen a pretty concerted effort across different companies to make their applications more open to an accessible market, to make sure that everyone has even and equal access to applications and software. And their challenges don't translate, and that user persona doesn't translate into, a ticket, into Jira without observing it and seeing those people and their struggles and watching somebody tab complete because that's their only key they can operate to get through to different areas of their application. So I'm a firm believer of, getting out, meeting up with user groups, setting up events where possible. And I totally agree that the size of company you are has a large amount of influence over how possible some of those things are. Maybe you don't have the budget to set up these events or fly out and see a whole bunch of different customers. And there are ways to get there, but it does, it also matters on where you are and what you're trying to build. And also, I'll say on Kendrick's point on, tickets around improvements in your product, maybe you're further down the life cycle of your product and it's really about enhancements and making sure that you're keeping your customers happy. And that's different than attracting new customers. So totally might change your perspective.
Yeah, I just wanted to second something Ian said. I think the salesperson I was most impressed by ever was one who quantified all the deals that were won and lost, and then basically said these are the reasons why, and was able to demonstrate from a numbers basis why we should build certain features. That kind of thing is more obvious to product managers, but for salespeople, it's quite something else. I also think that you can use salespeople to go learn about your product too, right? These are the people that are just talking to customers every day. You can sit in on calls, you can quantify their win losses. There's so many ways to leverage them. And a lot of people don't think through that process or how to, best utilize them.
Yeah, I totally agree that, sitting in on sales calls can be really powerful. Even having a prototype that you can share with prospects or your existing customers is a great way to get feedback. I really love, that kind of pairing between Quant and Qual. And I think this might speak to one of the questions that we just got in the chat as well, is like how many customers you need to speak to. I think that qualitative doesn't necessarily scale. You can't like go and do user interviews with every single customer, but what you can do is get a pulse by doing a sample of qualitative. And then, based on that, like maybe you'll hear about all the different value props that exist and what is important to that set of customers. Then you go and do quantitative to test that out on a bigger population and validate whether the things that you heard that you got a lot of color on from the user interviews that you did, whether that holds out with the rest of your customer base.
I love that reply, Lauren. I think that like really summarized it well for me, like the quant versus qualitative, like from what everyone was sharing, how you have to balance that. And as you were saying, Kendrick, when you're dealing with like a ton of data, when you're doing it at scale, like it's hard to find those nuggets of wisdom you're looking for. It can be overwhelming, and maybe like that's where more machine learning and like sentiment analysis and all this stuff could really help us like fine tune some of that and take away some of the grokking that we have to do sometimes as PMs, be able to find insights quicker. But I do want to transition now into like just going through some of the questions that we're getting in the webinar. I think we have one right now. I have some from the registration as well, but I'd actually just love for everyone to answer that question that Adrian just asked. How many different customers do you speak to on average when running discovery or research about a problem space? And how do these touch points change over the development lifecycle? I know, Lauren, you just answered that, but would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on that too.
I'll go with her first because she referred enterprise, right? I think B2B, and that could be a challenge because there's a lot of legalities on how do you even contact the customers. But I think it depends. What I have found useful in my experience is that I really build relationships with account managers for a few of our, let's say 10 of our customers, like big customers. They have sometimes dedicated account managers, and having that relationship where I could say, hey, I want to review my roadmap within, or I want to, go over some new features to get feedback. It's important. So I usually keep it at 10. And these are companies, right? Companies that have thousands of employees, because that is manageable for me. And also I don't bug too many of them. So I would say, depending on your company, build those relationships with either the support person that's in charge of a customer or the account manager, and then have those people available so you could always engage with them.
I want to just add one nugget of influence that I've had, or experience that I've had with that question, is research should be like almost like a factor tree. Like it should just, it spider cracks into other research. So I totally agree that you need to keep it reasonable. And I'd say 10 is a good number as well for engaging with customers, especially in B2B. But you're going to reveal new data points and conflicting data points that you're going to have to do more new research around. Like I think the biggest problem that people have when they're running research is they immediately find some new nugget of information and try to spread in just that one call. They try to reveal some new truth. Instead, you should document new hypothesis, run research again with either the same or different group with, questions that are well thought out, and try to avoid kind of a confirmation bias on kind of that one data point.
I would add to that one thing that I have noticed, because there's a really difficult balance between qualitative and quantitative data, right? And everybody interprets it differently. So the best thing for me, to be honest, is just the famous MVP, right? Just be iterative. If you can build something quick, ship it out there, use canary deployment, whatever technology you have to just like put that out there in front of a few customers, see their reaction, and then you could have data from actual customers that tell you how they're interacting with your product. Because you have no idea how many times you could argue about the type of data, the type of research, and you could just spend months wasting time on that, when you could just build something, ship it out there, get feedback, and iterate, right? Like that's the whole point of just being agile.
Yeah, I'll build on top of that and say, like, when you're building MVP, be very clear about what question you're trying to answer, right? Don't just build it for the sake of having MVP and be like, oh, some metric went up, so we should build this. It's like, no, like if the metric doesn't go up by this amount within like X iterations, then we're calling it quits. I see way too often these things get dragged out for years or get built into full products.
Oh, I was going to add on to Jesse's point around shipping something and then just seeing how people are using it. That's extremely powerful, right? They're going to tell you things in interviews, but what they say isn't always exactly how they behave. And so some of the best insights that I have had have come from just like sitting over the shoulder in a user interview and watching somebody use the product. And it turns out like that what we were there to talk about wasn't even like the main problem. It was something totally different that they didn't mention.
There's a saying, right? Customers can never tell you what the real problems are, right? Or they think they have, but that's not really it. So yes, I agree.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It's hard to like, it's our job is to like actually find out what they really want. And sometimes they don't even know what they want. You have to figure it out for them and like look ahead. So yeah, I think, we're running up on time here. I just want to say what a pleasure to spend my morning with y'all, just to like, hear all your responses, and just, I feel like I learned a ton here as well. And I'm sure everyone else on the call did as well. So thank you. Thank you all for just, all four of you for jumping on early and answering all these questions. And thank everyone for joining as well for all the wonderful questions. I apologize we couldn't answer all the questions that came in before the registration, but we have your contacts, so we'll reach out. And again, if anyone is interested to learn more about Apptentive as well, or how we can help you capture, analyze, and act on your customer feedback, please reach out directly at info@apptentive.com, or feel free to message us on LinkedIn. And yeah, just thank you again, Ian, Jesse, Kendrick, and Lauren for joining. It's been a pleasure. So
thank you for having us. I love doing this, by the way.
I'm so happy to hear that. Likewise, I would love to do more of these in the future.
Yeah, I think it's really good because I think about when I was starting my career about product management. Granted that it was so many years ago and the technology was not there. Zoom didn't even exist. But having like inside information from people who have been doing this for a while, it's so insightful, and sometimes it's just not easy to get.
Yeah, we haven't met up. I haven't met up with other product managers outside of my company in such a long time too, and like let alone talk to them. So this has been really nice to like just do a think tank of ideas in a long time. So I'm really enjoying this.
We're talking to other humans from other companies.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you very
joining
much.
us. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.